Good morning. Welcome to our session on diversity and inclusion, strategies that can spark real change. My name is Allison Klein. I am an HR consultant with VCFO, and I will be your moderator for this session. Today we have an amazing panel. As you probably heard us as we were discussing, we didn't get our few minutes in, so you probably heard us having our conversation. But they are going to share with you their insight on diversity and inclusion and strategies. But before we dive into our panel introductions, let's cover a few administrative things. Yes, even though we're virtual, there's still a few things that we need to discuss as we go through this virtual process. By now, most of you are probably subject matter experts on Zoom. During the session, to limit background noise, please remember to mute your speakers. If you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to put them in chat, and I will be monitoring as we go. During our session with our panelists, we will have about 30 minutes for each frequently asked question. You see those listed on my screen. This is not a PowerPoint presentation. It was just done to kind of help so you can see the questions that will be asked. And if you wish, you can take a picture of those questions, and or if you have other questions, definitely send them through chat, but this is just kind of a guideline for us. Each one of our panelists will have each one of our questions we will spend roughly 10 minutes on for our panelists to share their insight. And then after about 10 to 15 minutes before our session ends, I'll go over the questions and ask to our panelists that you've submitted through the chat option. So enough of that. Let's get to why everyone's here, and it's not to hear Allison Klein speak. The words diversity and inclusion have made into increasing numbers of mission statements, hiring policies, and workplace conversations as of late. And changing the way companies operate and how their employees work together because of the relevance of D&I in the workplace is our objective to share a few strategies that will help spark change. With us today is our panelists, Cassandra Wash with Adam and Reese LLP, Fabiola Bromley with Bank of America, Rodney Satterwhite with Insperity, and Brian Bruce with VCFO. Let's let our panelists introduce themselves. Cassandra, let's begin with you.
Certainly, thank you, Allison, and thank you all for being here today. I know this is a very relevant topic, and we're all honored to be a part of this panel and to chat with y'all. As Allison mentioned, I am an attorney. I'm with Adams and Reese, which is a full-service business law firm with offices all the way from Texas to Florida and all the way up to Washington, D.C., so we pretty well cover the Southeast. I'm an associate with the firm. I'm in my 6th year of practice, and I am what I call a death and deals lawyer. So what that means is that basically a large chunk of my practice falls under the umbrella of death. So planning for it, dealing with probate, giving operational advice to companies about things like who gets money sitting in a dead person's bank account, or who can be buried in a particular place. Those are a lot of issues I deal with. And then I also counsel clients on the other side through deals of all shapes and sizes, primarily in the real estate, corporate M&A sectors. So thank y'all for having me today.
All right, Fabiola, why don't we continue with the ladies?
Yes, thank you, Allison, and thank you all for joining us. I'm honored to be part of this panel today. They're wonderful panelists, so I'm just as anxious as all of you to hear from them. A little bit about me. I have been with Bank of America and its predecessors for almost my entire career, almost 36 years, and have been involved in a lot of different areas. Started out in accounting, part of the CFO organization, and then moved over to commercial lending and have been pretty much in the advisory side of commercial banking for the majority of my career. Today I sit as a vice chairman in business banking, which is a division of Bank of America enterprise that focuses on businesses that are anywhere from 5 to 50 million in sales size. but I have covered below that. So startups, I've covered above that. So middle market sized companies and companies that are set up for sale. So feel very comfortable in listening. It's the most exciting part of what I do is advising clients and advising our leadership on how to advise clients. So we cover the United States, so coast to coast, and we follow our clients globally. So we don't bank global companies outside of the US, but we absolutely bank companies that are domiciled or here domestically operating. I am an immigrant, so English is my third language. That's something many people don't know about me. And sit on the Global Diversity and Inclusion Council for the company that is chaired by our CEO, Brian Moynihan, and hold that to be, out of all the positions I hold and have held, really one of the most exciting, challenging, and uniquely different positions here at Bank of America. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Fabiola. We greatly appreciate you do quite a bit. So I'm exhausted just listening to all the things that you do. So Rodney, let's go with you.
Morning. I'm happy to be here as well. My name is Rod Satterwhite. I am with Insperity. My background, I started out in manufacturing, even though my education's in finance and economics. Did a stint there, moved over from the dairy and retail world into entertainment. I did a stint at Warner Brothers as director of category management, vice president of business development, before leaving there and going out into the entrepreneurial world, taking over a small company as COO and growing it from about 17 million to about 600 million in 3 years. So I understand the struggles that small businesses go through in growing and getting the best talent and working with people across different geographies and different personalities. So I started my business about 12 years ago. I joined Insperity. My business was consulting. Joined Insperity about 2 years ago, doing the same. And it's just been really exciting to be here and apply a lot of the organizational development techniques that I learned over a career to helping small businesses succeed. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Rodney, for that. Brian, last but not least, but you're my counterpartner at VCFO, so I had to put you last.
I was getting ready to say it's definitely not in this case, save the best for last, right? But I as well would like to say how proud and excited I am to join such a distinguished panel of experts, one which I am not, but I am still glad to be invited. My name is Brian Bruce, and I am a consulting CFO with VCFO. VCFO, we are a group of advisors and consultants, and we assist companies in various markets, industries, solve the most complex business problems. We have about 4,000 clients nationwide. We have offices in Dallas, Austin, Houston, and Denver. My particular niche with VCFO, actually I've been with the company for a little over a year, but this is my second stint with VCFO. Actually joined the company back in 2006 for a little time, and wow, have things changed since then. As I was saying, my niche is more or less in healthcare. I've been in healthcare for almost 20 years now. Started off as a financial analyst, have wound up as a CFO for several hospitals in the Texas area, some in New York City as well. A lot of physician groups, healthcare practices, family practices, ER services, and some cancer centers. I've operated functioning as well, in addition to being a CFO, as a director and vice president of revenue cycle management. So again, I am extremely proud to be here and looking forward to interesting engagement with the group. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for taking that off my plate and you guys representing yourself in a more appropriate way. So now that our panelists have introduced themselves, let the discussion begin. Again, there's been so much conversation around D&I, and there's sometimes people don't understand the differences between the two. So we're going to allow Rodney to start that conversation with us. to talk about what's the difference between diversity and inclusion. Rodney, you're on mute.
Sorry. For me, the key difference is, what you're actually trying to accomplish. So diversity is who you have in a room. So making sure that you have diverse talents in the room, and defining that diversity is really important. So you have what I call the internal attributes. So your age, your race, and we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about gender and a lot of time thinking about race, especially recently. But when you pan out a bit, you realize that there's so many different lenses that you can look through. So there's those internal pieces, like what I call what you're born into. But then as you step back, there's many, many other things that allow people to have those unique experiences that allow them to bring value to the discussion. Those are things like even the marital status, what job you're in, your background, your things that you choose to do in your life. And then inclusion is really about how you go about getting the best out of that talent. So it's not just about pulling from those talents to drive your business, but also growing those people and making sure that they feel like they're welcome, valued, respected, and heard. And so those last three pieces are really what inclusion's about, making sure that people who are in the room are participating. So no different than dealing with your extroverts and introverts, making sure that people in the room feel like they're in a room for the right reason, and then pulling those conversations out and then participation out of all of those people. What's really important with diversity and inclusion is really understanding why you're engaging in it in the first place. Is it a social issue for you? Is it a moral issue for you? Or is it about your business and being able to connect your workforce to the marketplace in a better way? In the middle there is the workplace, and ensuring that people, when they're inside of your workplace, feel like they are protected, that they are free from discrimination. So aside from the legal aspects, but just drawing people in to start conversations that are open, and that comes with a lot of different requirements. Companies that do diversity and inclusion the right way always insist that the tone is being humble and being open and assuming noble intent of the individuals involved, reestablishing the trust that allows people to come out and participate in conversations in ways that they may be hesitant.
Okay, that's good. Fabiola, you want to add something to that since you lead it at Bank of America, one of our biggest banks? So.
Sure. No, I think Rod made some excellent points as he described really who was around the table, why they were there, the struggle internally with each of us around what that means. What does inclusion mean? For me, it's I've gotten to the point where I've boiled it down to diversity is around representation. Do we have representation in the room of everyone we need to have in the room? And then inclusion is really much more about culture. And for a company of our size of over 200,000, culture is extremely important. So it's not just important that it sits the way, I love the way Rod described it. Is it a business case? Is it a moral issue? Is it, which is it? Well, when you're running a very large company, it's not just important what's inside you that you have to wrestle with, but how do you make sure you can scale that and that you ensure that the culture is pervasive throughout the company that you're looking for. So that's very much inclusion to me.
Awesome. From a workplace standpoint, Cassandra, I'd love to hear what you have to say when you're thinking about D&I.
Absolutely. One of the things that has always kind of struck me in circumstances where I've been a part of a presentation on diversity and inclusion or part of a conversation is that I think so frequently we try to provide opportunities, to underrepresented communities by basically leaving certain people out of the room, if you will. So just because I'm a woman, should I get an opportunity over a man just because I'm a woman, or just because I'm a certain color or creed or sexual orientation? Should I get an opportunity over others, who perhaps are associated with stereotypically overrepresented communities? And I think that kind of goes to a degree to a perception that diversity means people who look different. But I think, the key is realizing that diversity isn't about looking different necessarily. It's about people and ideas that are different. And I think that's really where the value is. And so if we leave out groups who we perceive as stereotypically overrepresented, I think that we really miss out on the true value and meaning of diversity, and the true value and meaning of inclusion, which I think is also just equally as risky.
May I add something there?
Absolutely, because I was going to wrap back to you because you kind of gave a definition that was very inclusive of ideas, thoughts, and processes, which creates the word diversity because it's about differences in general.
Yeah, and I think one of the best things about diversity and where we are right now is if you talk to people, boomers, they see diversity as those core born attributes. But when you talk to Gen Y people, they see diversity as much, much wider, and they have different perspectives on respect and who gets respect and who should be in the room, not just based on your age or seniority, but who's bringing the talent. And I think that speaks to what Fab was talking about earlier.
Absolutely, absolutely. But Cassandra, you kind of pushed us into kind of another question that we had. Does diversity mean exclusion? So do you want to expand on that? You kind of touched it a bit. So you want to expand on that? And then we'll get feedback from others.
Yeah, well, and I think that, Rod had an interesting point too. In certain circumstances, the hierarchy of a company kind of dictates who gets to participate in certain conversations or who gets to make certain decisions. But we overlook that folks can have different strengths and weaknesses irrespective of where they're at, in the hierarchy of the company. And so I think about that from the standpoint of age frequently, where, perhaps in my environment, an associate attorney may not be able to have the same level of transparency or the same opportunities to participate in decision making, as folks who are a little bit more advanced in their career or in their rank in the company. But people of varying ages and varying levels of the hierarchy can have different ideas, and perhaps a young person can come to the table with an innovative, fresh idea that no one ever thought of before, that could actually end up being very beneficial to the company in the grand scheme. And so I think it cuts both ways, from the standpoint of, are we talking about, who are we talking about participating? Who are we talking about? What types of ideas are we trying to up with or facilitate? What types of decisions are we trying to make? And I think ultimately I agree with Rod. It's who has the talent and who has the capacity to bring change about. And that's who needs to be sitting in those chairs and in the room making those decisions.
So kind of what I hear from the group is that diversity is where you look at the workforce or you look at the communities that you represent, and then you ensure that you have a diverse group of individuals to help create innovation, to continue to move forward your mission, your vision, and what you're trying to accomplish, where everyone feels included in that process. So Fabiola, do you want to expand upon that? Because again, you're serving a vast group of people.
Yeah, please call me Fab. Everyone calls me Fab, so feel comfortable saying that, okay? Yeah, I think Cassandra really dealt with the issue of exclusion in a very unique way, and I'll just sort of pile on, if you will. And if we can be honest around the table, part of the exclusion process or considering exclusion is sometimes when you're in the majority, you feel like diversity and inclusion is to the exclusion of some. And typically it's, white males that feel that way. So, we have to spend time making sure that the majority, whether it's men, whether it's white, whether it's old, as Cassandra was describing, whether it's young, it doesn't matter, whether it's orientation, whoever it is, that it's not a zero-sum game. It is not that, we include some to the exclusion of others. And so it's dispelling the notion that that is the case, that we have to work very hard on. And I think some of the ways, Cassandra described it, which are very specific to the younger generation, sort of having a voice at the table. I've had conversations with white men who feel like their voices are no longer heard, or that they are unable to express themselves because there's such a strong culture of inclusion. But I think what they miss is that we have to help them see or remove the blind spots that they've had, because until you start wrestling with through exercises, and I don't mean to jump ahead, to reveal those blind spots, to unveil what maybe some have been thinking about in terms of exclusive. They haven't really articulated how they have been included to the exclusion of others. And it's really taking people through those steps that really gets them to understand what that means, and that it is not a zero-sum game, that everyone wins when you have the voices at the table.
Thank you for that. That was well put. Well put. Thank you. Brian Rodney, because you're coming from the consultant environment, so you're dealing with different people when you're talking about diversity and inclusion. Would you like to add that on? Because you probably could have a perspective coming from a company's perspective on how do they look at it. So I'd love to hear from one of you.
Bridie, you go first. I can follow. I'll follow right behind you.
Sure. I think that's really, one of the first things from a consulting perspective that I try to do is really establish some common nomenclature, make sure we're talking about the same things, identify what diversity means. I was going back and doing a little research, and in 2010, which is only 10 years ago, only 30% of companies even had a true definition of what for their company diversity was. So here we are 20 years later, and it's not much better. So sitting down at the table and getting an understanding of what the C-suite really wants to drive out of their diversity initiative, what's their vision for the program, what are their objectives, what does success look like for them, and then getting their perspectives, and then trying to get a gauge on how the employees experience the culture at the company. So I really love what Cassandra was getting at in terms of really understanding the entire organization and how things are not just what the intentions, but how they're received on the other side. From there, that discovery will drive you to a lot of different places. And then the key, because this is, while it seems like a daunting task, it's really no different than any other strategy you'd like to implement, major strategy you'd like to implement at your company, but then working on the messaging, because it is such a sensitive topic. And like Fab indicated, it's not really taking opportunities away from anyone. It's making sure that you have the right people in the room, the right people on the bench, and the right people participating and driving the company forward.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. In this space, I find from a consulting role, when you're coming in, particularly you want to talk about diversity and inclusion, right? I do feel that oftentimes you start with your leadership space, and it's a reflection of what I'm going to call comfortability, and I'll get into that later. All right. Because I feel if you're in an industry and you've been in it for quite some time, and you're starting now to address the issue of diversity and inclusion, you have a long-standing problem that has been, I would say, not at the forefront of your culture as it should be, and you have to ask yourself why. Why am I comfortable with this position? I believe I just read recently that of the Fortune 500 companies, only 5% of the CEOs are women, particularly in the United States, where women outnumber men almost 2 to 1. You have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is that a problem? Or why is that the situation? And how come it hasn't been noticed to me before? Okay, so you have to be able to break the mold of comfortability when it comes into diversity, all right? Because that's in essence where it comes from. Your company reflects often not your belief system, what you feel most or less vulnerable in the presence of. And when you're coming into a D&I situation, you're literally are trying to put someone in a position of unfamiliarity, okay? Because that's in fact what inclusivity is, all right? And also, it's kind of like what I say, like the salesman's pitch. Everyone here within the sound of my voice offers some type of solution to a problem, a business problem to your customers, and you're the subject matter expert, okay? Well, within this space of D&I, you take on the value or the position of the customer because you're talking about a subject you're not familiar with. You're relying on the people you're supposed to lead to give you the information you need to make them feel comfortable. Because, I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you do a survey or a question or interview the particular base of people or individuals that we're talking about, you will find that most of them in your comfortable space feel extremely uncomfortable and unsafe.
I think there's also,
go ahead.
I think there's also the misnomer that people have that everyone in the group is the same. And I think that is as much of an obstacle as, finding diverse people, is that people assume that if you've started a company with a bunch of your friends, that you guys are all alike, when that's not the case. For making people understand that within diversity, if you get outside of those born traits or characteristics, you're probably very, very different from one another. And that is why your company has been successful, because you all bring unique perspectives to the table. And so that, I think that's one of the lost opportunities that we have when we're having these discussions. We tend to focus on how the other are like us and not look at how we are quite different from one another, although while we seem to fall inside the same diverse group.
That's a really good point. I'm going to steal that from you. So I'm taking my notes. So I'm going to write that one down as we go. Okay. And so let's keep it moving. And all of that was some great discussion. I mean, that was good information that people can share, actually take back and look at how they're approaching diversity in their workforce. And let's move to Fab, now that I can call her Fab. I appreciate that. What is the most difficult part of implementing a D&I program? You have done it, and you've done it with the top leadership in your organization. So I would love to hear your perspective. What was your approach, and what was the difficulties that you guys had in that process?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I'm glad that you put it on the table, because we've done it the wrong way several times. And so I will say probably what I would think of as the most important and the hardest part about implementing a diversity inclusion program in any company is where it's being driven from. And I've done it in predecessor organizations before we were bought, and I've done it at Bank of America, where it wasn't led from the top. But I would say the most critical element and the most difficult element, it sounds really simple, but it has to be driven from the top. For us at Bank of America, it's at the board level, it's at the CEO level. I have been a member of the Global Diversity and Inclusion Council for the last 4.5 years. We meet quarterly. We have individual sessions in between, depending on which part of the objectives that we're taking on. It is made up of every business head or their proxy. I'm the proxy for the president of our business because I'm vice chair. But it is led by our CEO. Our CEO has chaired the Diversity and Inclusion Council for the enterprise and has never missed a meeting as long as I have been a member, even through the crises, and it doesn't matter. He has never missed a meeting. It was established over 10 years ago. However, 10 years ago, he took control of it as our CEO. And I would say that that's the most difficult thing. So if you're an HR executive, if you're a business line executive, if you're head of sales, if you're head of, if you're CFO, if you're taking it on and it is not established from the highest level of the organization, I just think that it will have a very high potential to fail, because people always look to the top. What do I have to do to move in this organization? And that cultural core is set at the top. It's a value system that has to start at the top. If it does not reflect the board and the CEO at the highest executive levels, it has a very high degree of failure. Now, what happens once you get that commitment from the top is through the development of a diversity and inclusion council made up of diverse members of the team, right? And is very difficult to get because typically a Gen Z is not going to be running a line of business in the company, right? So it's going to be very difficult to do that. The way we get that voice heard is we formed a next gen council that contemplates these issues, and that is led by one of our members in our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council. So there's a way to do it to include every voice, but yet it has to be made up of hierarchically made up from the very top of the organization. I think once you have that set, then you can start to set metrics and goals for representation, recruitment, development, retention, promotion. And then you can start to set goals, and they don't have to be massive goals initially, but they have to be progressive goals. And that's what we have done over the last 10 years is set very progressive goals every year. No matter what business you're running, it has to improve in terms of its representation, in terms of we do ongoing employee engagement surveys. Even when during the pandemic, our CEO said where a lot of people advised, oh, this is not a good year to survey our employees. He said, no, it is the right year. It is in the worst possible conditions with multiple segments of our population, employee population suffering, from COVID-19 at a much more disparate way. We've got to survey our people. And so it's recognizing from the top, setting metrics and goals that are progressive year over year, constantly looking at year over year, and then measuring and holding those business leaders accountable. I think accountability has to follow through. You have to follow through on the metrics. You can't say you believe in something and then you don't set metrics, and then you can't set metrics without holding people accountable. And I think those are the things that start to really drive the core value system in the organization. It also becomes a magnet for talent. It becomes a magnet for retention. We have people that, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at them, they are not leaving because of the culture. And I think that is something that really, it takes years to get there, but it's about showing progress that gets you there. So I'm sure we're going to hear from the other panelists, and I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I feel like I've been nodding, really intentionally. I'm right there with you on that. I think it's interesting because as humans, we try to kind of put complex issues into a box, and into a box that we understand and that we can contemplate and that we can handle. And so from that standpoint, frequently you see initiatives be put forth, sometimes maybe just so that people can check a box to say, yes, our company does this, or to give themselves a pat on the back, like, yeah, okay, I'm doing the right things because we have a yearly diversity retreat where everyone, who's quote unquote diverse gets to go to a hotel and like hang out with each other. But going back to something that Ron had mentioned earlier, I think it's really important to really go back and think about, what does our company look like? What are we trying to accomplish? What are our objectives? What's our organization's definition of diversity, inclusion? What does that mean? How does that fit into our entire organization? And then how are we going to use that to build culture, to create a long lasting standing culture that people can buy into, and that people believe, that they don't just think, okay, this is that cool thing that they rolled out in January, and then by March, just like our fitness goals, like it's fizzled out, right? And so from that standpoint, I also think just there's value. I mean, I think there's certainly, it has to come from the top down, but there's also value understanding that people at all levels of the hierarchy are seeing the world and circumstances that they're dealing with from all different levels. And so where a person, a C-suite individual may have a certain takeaway, say, for example, or been experiencing COVID, well, maybe they could afford to have a teacher come in and teach their children, or a nanny to come in and watch their children. But what about the lowest man on the totem pole who, you know, is taking care of children at home and is having to educate them? You know, and what does that look like, and what are we willing to do? And then what do people need? I think that's a valuable thing to be asking too. What do you need from us so that we can support you, make you feel respected, make you feel valued, and keep you on the team? We value, you know, you as a talented professional. I think all that stuff's really important.
I would like to add one piece, and I guess it's a question actually for Fab. So when I talk about diversity and inclusion, I think it really lives in your talent management strategy, and it's enabled by your communication strategy and the messaging that you have throughout in all of the layers. And then the piece that is surrounds that is really the culture, and if senior leadership is living or modeling the behaviors outside the organization. So how are you involved in a larger community? You know, how are you selecting where you're putting your new distribution facility? How are you putting yourself in the best position to be able to attract the people that you're trying to market your products to? So I'd love your perspective on the talent management piece.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Rod, because talent management, if it's not practiced in a way that, and then this is where HR can be extremely valuable in making sure people understand what the talent management process is intended to do. Sometimes we think, okay, we've asked the individual where they'd like to go next, or what they'd like to do to improve their development or to continue their development. And then we, you know, match that with whatever whatever resources we have. And that's not really all that talent management is supposed to do. It's supposed to be more about exposure. It's about finding their voice, and do they have a voice and an opinion that's being shared consistently? Are we teasing that out of our minority representatives around the table? And so it's where we find the most difficulty is in middle management. Really, we don't find it up above, but it's how do we make sure that is happening? We conduct talent management in our company twice a year. And today, you know, we used to describe, let's just say, certain behaviors, or the way we would talk about an individual. And I hope you all don't mind my sharing this, but if a man was really ambitious and very deliberate about his way of implementing whatever those ideas are, we would say he's ambitious. He's strong. He will not take no for an answer. He is a driver, yeah. Right? If a woman with the same exact behaviors was demonstrating those same attributes, well, she breaks a little glass. She gets it done, but she breaks a little glass along the way. She's got sharp elbows. So we've taken certain terms and we've eradicated them from the talent management process. So in the discussion, which takes a day or two with leaders at every level, we've taken certain phrases out of question. Like, you can't say that about women. You can't say, well, they're not strong enough, or they're not deliberate enough, or it's up to you as a leader to help them find their voice, right? And if they have interest in continuing to develop and maybe to seek management levels or to move along in the company, not everybody does. Sometimes people want to stay in one position and they like where they are. They don't want to make a change. They just want to master their craft right where they are. That's fine too. But it's up to you as a leader to determine who wants what. And your job is to tease it out of them in those one-on-one conversations. So we spend a lot of time, and today we take those groups of talented individuals who have clearly exceeded their targets, and we ask the question, why are they not on the list for that next rung in the ladder, or whatever that next opportunity is, and what are we doing to give them more exposure? So it's not just about the next promotion, it's also about exposure and taking on assignments. We're in a matrix company. So, Rod, to your question, there are lots of assignments that get handed out that are really kind of cool assignments. They're not part of your day job, but it's an opportunity to stretch and show what you can do, and to have other people weigh in on evaluating how you did in that assignment. So it's really making sure not just the day-to-day job responsibilities, but the voice around the table, the assignments and exposure around the company are all taken into that talent management process. And we highlight people who have historically not been able to be at that table. And then we ask the question, why are they not at the table, right? And that has to happen. And, you know, we spent probably 1 to 2 hours prepping the team to get into that mindset as we're starting to discuss individuals, right? Very, very important part of that process.
Thank you. I was going to just add one more thing. I think what you're talking about and what I've seen, obviously minorities fall into that same bucket. When I read Sheryl Sandberg's book a long time ago, I saw myself, because I was the single minority in the room, feeling many of those same things that she talked about in the book. But on the performance versus potential, if potential is on the vertical and performance is on the horizontal, making sure that we're evaluating every person with those same, across those same 2 metrics equally. And I think that's where the equality piece comes in.
And we talked about equality in our pre-setup because we're like, we need a whole nother session to talk about that in general and to give it its due diligence, its due time. So this was great conversation, and me as an HR person would have loved to have been able to give my insight and input, but I know I've got to keep us moving because we've got about 15, 17 minutes left. And we have one good question that I want everyone on the panel to have the opportunity to speak to. And that is, what is your biggest advice for the audience that we have? What is your biggest advice of getting started with diversity and inclusion in their organization? So Brian, let's start with you since I've been putting you last. I'm gonna put you first. How about that?
No, that's okay. I've just been really engaged into the discussion. It's been going. I mean, wow. It's been quite refreshing to listen to. But in any event, I generally have 2 things that I would say that are important as you start your initiative. One, and I'm speaking specifically from the CEO role and leadership role. And that is, first, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. Because the fact of the matter is, you are addressing what boils down to, in some degree or another, a more positional how you think about things that are outside what makes you comfortable. I'm going to use that word comfortability a lot through my message. But D&I, for the most part, is going to spark some tough conversations that are going to challenge the way that you normally think and operate. It's going to force you into a realm of being uncomfortable. Why? Because as a leader, you are always in the position to guide, to push, to bring the best out of individuals, particularly where you are the subject matter expert. But here you're not. And it's probably going to be the first time more than ever where you're going to rely a lot on your employees, the underserviced culture within your organization to tell you your spots and pockets where you're wrong or where you need help. Okay, so you have to be willing to be vulnerable because this is not going to be an easy conversation at all. Okay, because it's the whole "I'm okay, you're not okay" type of paradigm for the most part, and it is tough. I've coined this phrase that the most difficult problem in solving a problem is admitting that you're part of the problem. And that's extremely difficult in this space to realize, hey, I have built this culture that's not diverse, that's not inclusive, and I'm a good person. You're going to have to kind of remove yourself from that and take this situation of I need help. And some of the things I'm just not probably are going to be really uncomfortable for me to hear. Another thing that I like to stress right as you're becoming vulnerable and having these conversations is that you have to have the ability to listen with sympathy and have a willingness to understand. Because a lot of times when we're engaged in conversations, very tough conversations, particularly about our individual selves and what we think, our affiliations with a group or another, like we tend to, when we hear, I'm going to use the word criticism for lack of a better term, constructive criticism for lack of a better term, we tend to listen with the readiness to reply, justify, or explain versus listening with sympathy to understand. Okay, I'll give you just a quick synopsis really fast in the interest of time. That I remember when a lot of the pulse of the nation early in the year was coming on subjects of systematic racism, diversity and inclusion and the like. In a conversation with an individual who's the CEO of a company who looks different from I do, who has different experiences than I do, and the like. And a lot of his beliefs on a lot of the instances going through the country was based on his perspective, which was fine, okay? But I have learned that generally, when you come to pulsating positions of people, right? Their opinions are generally shaped on how the particular subject matter affects them. And what I mean by that, when he was sharing his thoughts and the like, he was removing himself out of the situation. And I simply asked him a question based on the subject that we were talking about. I said, with all the information you have on this particular subject, with all that you've witnessed on this particular subject, right? I want you to remove the person out of it and place in that position your father, your son, or your brother. And tell me, is your decision is still the same? If your father or your brother or your son was treated in that manner, would you still feel the same way? And he quickly answered to the point I was saying. He first said to me, well, nobody in my family will ever be in that position. And I'm sure the person in that position felt the same way. None of us are exempt to the problems in life. Right. And I said, and the fact that you answered me in that way goes to show that you're not willing to understand somebody else's plight because you can't put yourself in their position. And the fact of the matter is, you understand if their situation affected you in this particular way, your value system was changed. Because as long as it doesn't affect you, you have one position. But the moment it affects you or somebody you care about or somebody you know, your position change. So again, my 2 points would be willing to be vulnerable and be able to listen with empathy, with a willingness to understand.
Awesome. That's really good. We appreciate that. So panelists, you want to give us some word of advice and some words of wisdom as we wind down?
And going next, I think Brian said several very, very helpful things, and what we have done in our company, I'll share, and I don't know to what extent, but it follows what Brian suggested. You really want to get a good look at yourself, right? And we do it through independent surveys, right? We use outside consultants. We don't ask ourselves, because when you ask, you're not going to get a straight answer. So we use independent surveys. We also evaluate our leaders through a 360 evaluation process every year. Employee survey. Included in our employee survey is the Diversity and Inclusion Council questions, but it's not about D&I. It's really very specific to how do you feel operating in this company. It's about, do you feel heard? Do you feel, and then we take those statistics and we match them up, because that's what happens. But I'll say you have to get a good look at yourself, and you have to own the results. No matter what those results show, you cannot debate them and try to figure out why they are the way they are. They are the way they are. You have to own them. And I'll just say one last thing is that I was responsible for an entire state, a huge team that was not diverse. And the leader was a phenomenal leader, white male, but just could not see why the talent was not attracted to his team. His team just did not attract talent, diverse talent, because the team was not diverse. Diversity begets diversity. So as we started challenging him, and his results were not good either, as we started dealing with the issue over a period of 3 years, went from last in place to number one. and has held that position. He's got the most diverse team today, and I've long since turned over the reins to a successor of mine in that region. And I'll just say that if you don't drink the Kool-Aid, don't believe it, put it to the test. The business case for diversity and inclusive culture is there. You will reap the rewards of that through top line revenue, more customers, bottom line profitability, all the way around, and less turnover, more productive teammates, and a great place to work. So that's my advice.
Thank you. So we have about 8 minutes. I would love to get the remainder of the panelists, but I want to wrap up and just make sure that we can take any questions if anyone has them. So are there any questions? I'm checking chat. Everybody's been a bit quiet. But I don't want to miss our audience and give them that opportunity if they have any questions for us. All right. Well, nothing's come through. And again, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists. You guys have done an amazing job. I can sit here and listen to this conversation ongoing. So I'm like, I will be following you guys to see what else that you're talking about in this space, because I really appreciated listening to it. I would like to get some feedback. You know, as we close out, I want to say thank you to our audience. I want to say thank you for participating. Thank you for listening to what we have to say. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you to our organizers. Without them, this would not be possible. So as we're closing, love to get your feedback on what did you like? What could we improve? And you can put that in chat, or if you wish to share and take yourself off of mute.
Well,
How can we?
Well, I'll start. I just, as a matter of improvement, I just have no suggestions. I just really like the fact that the answers were, to me, in my opinion, thought-provoking. You know, there's a lot of information and content to think about and consider. You know, I know from why I'm like you, Allison, I was sitting mostly on the edge of my seat with a lot of the content. I think all of my co-panelists did exceptionally well. And I know I'm leaving out of this this discussion a lot better than when I started. So, and I think when that happens, it's very appreciative.
I do have one little brief comment. So one of the things that we skipped over was a point I wanted to make was this is not a training initiative. And be careful not to make it a training initiative, not to make people attend trainings because of the sensitive nature. You know, my best advice is to try to encourage people to have intellectual curiosity. And by doing that, admit that, you know, this is a journey. There's not a path that, you know, has been tried and true and will work in every situation. And then ask something of your people. So don't just push information out. Ask them to participate. Ask them to engage, and ask them lastly to be willing to learn, be open to perspectives. So I think that's the one piece that I wanted to drive home that I missed a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and I appreciate
if I may jump on that just really quick, Rodney, I would like to just say, to me, what you said last is most important, the willingness to learn. For all in the sound of my voice, I quickly would urge you to take a survey of your people and have a question in there, something to the fact of, like we had, do I feel minorities or a lot of underrepresentation in particular groups? What do I feel that I have cultural biases? Do I feel I know enough about diversity and inclusion? You'll be surprised at some of the answers you get. And the more you get those answers of, I know all I need to know, I know as I can know, I know more than everyone else, you will pinpoint that there's a large problem in the aspect of your organization. And that's where you need to start, is education.
Sandra?
Yeah, I'm really piggybacking off of that. You know, I think that one of the takeaways that I have is there were 3 panels that folks could have chosen to attend during this time frame. And anyone who signed in, you know, recognizes that this is a very, very important, very complex topic and conversation. To the point of, you know, kind of self introspection and kind of looking at yourself, looking at your company and how it operates. I think it's also important to realize and recognize that it's okay to be at the start of the process. It's okay to know everything. It's okay to be learning, and it's okay to be in a position where you're still asking questions. And, you know, I'll say for me, I tend to be kind of the type of person, I don't engage in social media. I don't, you know, I'm a lawyer, but I don't like to argue. And a lot of times I just want to have fun and, you know, not really engage in difficult conversations. But from that standpoint, participating in this type of a forum really forced me to dig in and to really think about these issues. What does diversity and inclusion mean? You know, what does it mean to me as a person? What does it mean to my firm? What does it mean to the world that I live in? And so from that standpoint, I think participation is really just the key takeaway for me. It's okay to learn, it's okay to be learning, and we all should participate and figure out where we fit and how we can, you know, how we can participate in implementing the change. I think that would be my key takeaway from today.
Agreed.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Awesome. Thanks. All of that was some good advice again. Unfortunately, they put me on the moderator side and I can't jump in sense here. But I do know we had someone come in and say, are good overall surveys available? And I would just say this, definitely reach out to me. We have some surveys. I have some options that you can do. I always think the best surveys are not your canned ones. It's the one that you do, because they need to be different. They need to be more specific to your organization, the culture that you have, and what you're trying to do within your organization. So those canned ones, they give you some information, but they don't dive in to give you really what you need to move your company forward and make D&I a fabric of your organization and who you are. So we're going to part with that. Again, thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate it. Have a link for you all to join back into the closing session. And panelists, thank you for dealing with your rookie. I'm no longer a rookie. I've got one under me now. Greatly appreciate you, and you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
You're awesome, Allison. Thank you all so much.